Okay, welcome everybody. This is CSIS-3020, Web Programming and Design. Let me see, chapters 12, 13, 14, and 15. Okay? Last week, if you guys remember, we covered chapters 8, 9, 10, and 11. And the week before, we covered 6 and 7. Okay? So we should be done with most of the JavaScript knowledge by tonight. Let's dive into JavaScript. So last week we covered 4 chapters about JavaScript functions and arrays and the different objects that you have available, etc., etc. Now we're going to cover one of the most important ones, which is the document object. In fact, it has its own name. It's the DOM, Document Object Model. Okay? And it's the representation of your web page inside the browser. It's a JavaScript representation of that object. So let's take a look at it. This is an XHTML page. Did we cover this last time? No? Okay. I'm going to use Firebug and I'm going to inspect this page. Notice that the HTML contains a header and a body. The body contains an H1, a paragraph, another paragraph, and then an unordered list. The unordered list contains 3 line items. Got it? If you go into a section of Firebug called the DOM, this is the actual representation of all the objects that you have available. And in fact, as you can see, you have the document and the window. Remember the window object? Who is the window object? The browser. And you can tell the window, hey, I want you to create a pop-up, which is a window alert, or window prompt, or, all those kinds of things you can get the window object to create. But right now, we're not going to concentrate on those. We're going to concentrate on the document, which is another object. When you expand the document object, and I apologize if this looks very tiny, but I have no way of changing the size of this thing. The document object, notice that it has child nodes. And one of the child nodes of the document object is HTML tag. Okay? So if we dive into the HTML tag, notice that the HTML tag also has child nodes. The first child node is head, the second child is a text node, and then the third one is body. And then if you dive into the body tag, notice that it also has its own child nodes. What are the child nodes of body? Text, H1, text, P for paragraph, text, P. So you get the point. You're practically viewing your entire HTML document as a hierarchical tree. And that's what the DOM is. It's a document object model of your document, of your web page. Which means that by going through the document, you can get to every single piece of tag and content in your web page. And from here on, we're going to see how we can use JavaScript in combination with the document object to do all kinds of neat things. like add events, add code, change styles, do all kinds of stuff that it's not in the HTML, but it can be accomplished in the HTML through JavaScript. Yes. If you put JavaScript, it will appear as a comment. See, comment is one of the. Remember, JavaScript appears for HTML as a comment. That's why it ignores it. Remember? Good question. All right. So, look at this one. So, I'm going to get an element by ID from here. Okay? And the element is called big heading. Or paragraph 1. You guys see that? Or item 1. How do I accomplish that? The document has a function. Remember, document is an object. An object has properties and methods or functions. The document, and this is something that I ask you to please go and look into W3 Schools if you want to see a whole list of them. There's a whole list of them, okay? And I'm not gonna go through many of them. I'm just gonna show you that they are there and that they are available for you to use. But in this case, it has one function called getElementById. Remember, every tag in HTML could have an ID. ID is like the name, right? That uniquely identifies that tag within the document. So you can have a paragraph or a div or an image, whatever, with ID equals, and you give it a name or a number, whatever. Something unique. In this case, getElementById will go through the entire DOM and look for that element with that name. Okay? And what are we doing? What are we doing when we get to that element? We're changing a style of that element. In this case, it's the background. We're just changing it to yellow. How do we accomplish that? Let's see. We have a button called getById. So we go into the source code and look for a button called getById. Here it is. It's an input tag. Type submit. That means it's a button that shows on the face getById. When I click on it, I'm going to execute a function called byId. Correct? So somewhere in here, I'm going to find a JavaScript function called byId. Here it is. What does it do? It tells the document, hey, give me an element by ID called GBI. Who is GBI? That's the ID of the box right next to that button. You guys see that? Remember, this is a box, and this is the button right next to the box. The box is called GBI. So you're actually getting, in here, you're actually getting the box. When you say document getElementById GBI, you're getting the box. And then from the box, you're asking for the value. So basically what you're doing is you're asking for that value, item 1. And you're putting it in here. Then you tell the document, okay, now document, get me an element that is called that value. So it's going to go again through the entire DOM and it's going to find me the one tag that is called that way. So it's going to go through the entire DOM like this until it finds this line item tag. That line item is called item 1. That's the one that I want. And it's going to give it to me right here. Target. And then what do we ask? If target is null, if target will say false, which means it doesn't exist. So when the document tried to get an element that doesn't exist, item 99999, it's going to return false. Doesn't exist. Okay? But if it does exist, if target comes back as true, then you're going to switch to the target. And switch to is another function. Switch to is another function. And you're going to pass that element that you want to switch to. In this case, it's what? The line item called item 1. Correct? So notice that we're passing the whole objects into functions, which you can do very easily with JavaScript. Not only strings, not only numerical values, but whole objects. A whole line item is being passed as a parameter to switch to. And then what do you do with it? You have somehow a current node, and its current node is one of the global variables. Okay? So somehow you have a current node. And then what you do with the current node is you change the class name to empty. You put the new node that you're passing as a parameter as the current node. Right? So you make it point the current node now to the new node. And then you change the class name of the current node to highlight it. And we're going to see how that's, in fact, it's probably within here. Highlighted. What does it mean to have a style of highlighted? Remember, any tag that has the class highlighted means that the background color will turn into yellow. Right there. So you guys see the power of JavaScript? We're totally modifying styles. We're totally changing. We're going through the entire document, grabbing tags and changing their styles right there on the code. And then what do? We tell the document to get the element GBI. Remember, GBI is a text box right next to the button. And what are we going to do? We're going to change the value of that box to the ID of the current node. Okay? That's how we do this. So right now, current node is item 1. And I'm about to get by ID item 2. Here it is. That's what it did. It found item 2 and it changed the class to highlighted, which make it change its background color to yellow, and then it notified me in here item 2 has been changed. Now, if I have item 2 selected, that's my current node. Remember, I have a variable up there, global variable called current node. And what is current node pointing to? Item 2. I'm going to insert another line item. Before item 2. And what did I call it? New 0. How did I do that? How do you accomplish that? Now I'm actually creating content with JavaScript. Because now this new tag is my current node. Remember, current node always get highlighted because it's the current node. That's how I know where it's going to be inserted before. That's how I know how to append a childhood. That's how I know how to replace the current with another one, or how I can remove it. See what happens when I insert before. See how it's different? And now it's keeping track, somehow it's keeping track of new names. The one before was new 0, now this one is new 1. So we're actually changing through JavaScript, we're changing the content. How do we do this? The insert before. Again, very similar. The insert before is a button that executes the insert JavaScript, right? Now, keep in mind that the box right next to it, the name is INS. Okay? So insert, here it is. Insert, what does it do? It creates a new node. Wow, it creates a new node. What does that mean? It's a function that we create called create new node, and we pass some text to it. So let's find out what the parameter is before we dive into it. So what does insert do? It creates a new node, and what is the parameter? The parameter is document, get me an element called INS. And you know that the INS is the box right next to it. And then give me the value. So we're creating a new node with whatever I put in that box. Okay? And then what do? I tell the current node, hey, tell me who your parent is. And remember, we are going through hierarchical tree. That means that from the children you can get to its parent, or from the parent you can get all the children. So you can go up and down the hierarchy. In this case, we're telling, hey, current node, tell me who is your parent node. And then insert before that parent, insert before the new node. And then what do? We switch to that new node. And the switch, you know what it is. It's just highlighting it. So how do you create a new node? Let's go to the create new node function. Look at this. Document, create an element, and the element is a P. The browser not only has the capability of rendering image tags and paragraphs and divs and ULs and LIs and all this stuff and tables, it also has the capability of creating a new one of each one of those. Okay? On the fly. So when you say document create an element P, you are creating a new paragraph tag in here. And you're setting it as the new node variable. And then what do? Notice that you create a string called new, and then you append an ID count. An ID count most probably is a global variable. There it is. ID count is a global variable that started at one point in time with 0. And that's where we get the new 0, new 1. And every time that you create a new one, it gets incremented. What's the whole purpose of it? So that the new elements have a unique ID. It's very important that every element in the document model have a unique ID. Then you increment the counter. And then what do? You put the ID on this new node. You set up that node ID. So new 0, new 1, whatever that is. Okay? Then what do? You create a text. This text that was passed to you, which is the content of the tag, what do to it? You are going to prefix to this text the square brackets, the ID of the node, and then ending with square brackets. That's how you get all these names as part of the content. That's the only reason you're getting the actual name in the content. Remember, all this is content. How these things are called, they're totally hidden to you. They're inside the DOM. Because the browser, all it's trying to do is render to you the content. So if we want to play with the names, we better put the names as part of the content. Which is what we're doing with paragraph 1, paragraph 2, new item 1, item 2, etc., etc. Okay? And then once we have that text, what do? We say, okay, document, create a text node. Create a text node and put that text in that text node. Okay? So now, what do? You take that new node, which is a P paragraph, right? And then you append to it that text node. Let's go back to the inspecting the element. You guys see that? P is the actual new node. That's the one that we say, hey, document, create an element called P. Not called P, a P type, a paragraph type. Right? Here it is. And then whatever text falls between the beginning and the end of the paragraph tag is what you appended as one of its children. It's called append child. And all you do is create a text node with some text. Okay? Now another way of looking at this is through the DOM. So if we go to the DOM, document, HTML, body, and then you go to new. It's the 11th or the 12th one. Notice, what does it show as the child node of new? It's text content. See that? In fact, it's a name value pair. It's an array of name value pairs. See the array? The array is this one with the square brackets. And what does it have in the array? It have a text node, text content. Equal what? Equal new my line item. And it is a child node. It is a child node of the paragraph. Got it? So this new one, my line item, which is the actual content, is actually a child text child node of a paragraph node, which is inside the body, which is inside the HTML, which is inside the document. And that's how you can traverse back and forth in the document. So I'll leave you to figure out the rest of the stuff, like appending a child, to it, or replacing current. Just replaced it, or remove it. Oh, can remove top level. So get by ID and then remove. Can remove that. It's a top level. You cannot remove any one of the top level ones. So item 3, and you remove it. And then you can get the parent of that. No parent. So the parent of item 1 is a list. And we can see that if we inspect the elements, the unordered list, it's called list. That's the parent of item 1. Anyway, so you get the point. Let's move on. This is more of the same. Collections. Now look at this one. Enter a color name for the background of this page. How do you think that's done? First of all, as soon as I refresh or load the page, I get a prompt. Anybody, tell me, how do you accomplish that? Window what? Yeah, the pop-up is a window prompt. But how do you get that window prompt to load? No, there's an event in the body. When you load the page, okay, there's gotta have an event. The body tag gotta have an event called unload. And the unload will have the value of a function, of a JavaScript function that does that, the prompt. Okay? So once you get a value from the prompt back, you use it to change the background attribute style of the body. Okay? That's my guess. Let's see. The body has a style. The style has a background color, and the background color defaults to green. But it has an onload. And an onload, notice that the onload is just another attribute of the body. But in this case, this attribute is very particular because it's actually indicating an event. Sort of like we did with the unclick of a button, that when you click on it, it executes a function. There is also an onload. And there's a whole list of other events available that you can take a look for each tag. In this case, when the body gets loaded on onload, you will execute the start function, the start JavaScript function. And the start JavaScript function is this one. What do? You just prompt, enter a color name for the background of this page. And then you put it into input color. And then what do? You tell the document, hey, notice that we didn't even do a get element by ID. Why? Why didn't we just do a get element by ID to get the body? Anybody? No, because body doesn't have an ID. Right. But you can call the body whatever you want, and then you can say, document, get me an element. The document doesn't care what element it is. A body, a paragraph, a line item, whatever. But in this case, we don't have an ID for the body. But the DOM knows about a body, because there's only one. There should only be one in a document. That's why we can do this. .body. And it will give you that element. It's not the only way that you can get the body. You could also have given an ID to the body and then tell the document, hey, get me an element by ID, whatever you want to call it. Document body, and then what do you do with that body? You go into the style of that body. Specifically, you go into the background color attribute of that style. And what do you assign to it? That input color that you just... And that's it. This background color will know that it's this background color in the style. Yes, this is the CSS convention, and this is the JavaScript convention. And just because in JavaScript no name should have the dash. And it's camel cased. See that? Remember, JavaScript is case sensitive, so you have to spell it the same way. So if I refresh, notice that on load, it put the background color green. And then it went and executed the what is the name of the function? The start function, which says, enter a color. I enter a color, and it changes the background color of the body. Any questions? That's how you dynamically change styles using JavaScript. Okay. This one is pretty neat. See that? I click on one image cover, and it selects it and dynamically grows it. How do you do that? How do you accomplish that? First of all, let's dissect this thing. You guys see two folders, right? Full size and thumbs. If we look at thumbs, notice that these are small versions, that's what it's called, thumbnails, right? Versions of the images. And if we go into full size, you will see the full size, the bigger ones, sizes of the same images. Okay? And they're all typically 492, 91 pixels by 640. 488 by 640. 501 by 640 pixels. Okay? Now, somehow I'm displaying in here the thumbnails. And then in here I'm displaying the full size. But I'm not displaying the full size at once. I'm actually taking the full size and displaying it this tiny. Which we know how to do that, right? Remember, images have attributes called width and height? Right? We can play around with that. So we start displaying it really tiny, and then gradually, by changing the width and height, we can make it look bigger. So let's see if that's the case. The body has two divs. This div is called main img. And this div is called thumbs. Okay? img, or main img div, contains an image. With style. And notice that as part of the style we have the width and the height. The width is 287, the height is 376. So let's go into this. Here they are. Div, main image. Inside, you find an image. It's a full-size image of this. Internet World Wide Web How to Program 4, which is the one that we're using as a textbook. Okay? And right next to it, there's a div called thumbs. And it's displaying the small version of each one of them. Notice that each one of the thumbs contains an onClick event. Okay? What is it supposed to happen when I click on one of those thumbs? It's supposed to run a JavaScript function called display. And then you pass the name of the image that you want to display. So let's take a look at that function, display. Here it is. Display. You just pass the image file as a parameter. So what do? First you have to grab that image, right? I just click on a thumb and I'm telling you what's the name of that image that I'm trying to show. I'm passing it as a parameter. So what do? You say, okay, document, get me an element by ID called image cover. An image cover is the actual ID of the image inside the first div. Okay? Image cover is the name of the image. So it's going to say, hey, here it is. Your entire image object. And we call it big image. And we also create an image tag. Remember how we created a P tag before in another example? We just say, hey, document, create an element, and we just pass P. In this case, we create an element and we pass img. We're creating an actual image. And then, we call it new node. So now, right there, under new node, we have a new empty image tag. What do you do with it? You start populating all these attributes of the image tag. You say, okay, the ID of this image is going to be image cover. Remember, we already have an image cover. And the source is going to be full size / and then you append the image file that you pass as a parameter. And the alternative is going to be large image. And the class name is going to be image cover. And the style width is going to be 0 pixels. And the style height, 0 pixels. And then what do you do with it? You say, big image. Now, big image, remember, was the image that we were showing. The big image that we were showing initially there. Give me your parent node. And then once you have that parent node, who is the parent node of big image? The div. Who is the parent of big image? Big image is this guy. The div. Yes. Because that's another way of modifying the width and height of an image through the styles. You know that width, it will change the width of the image. Yes, it's just a different way. Now the new way, the way that you just mentioned is what it's called old school. You used to have to modify the image width and height by its own attributes. But then people start saying, listen, you know what? It's easier to manipulate any tag through styles. Let's forget about width and height as attributes of the image tag, and let's modify it through styles. And that's why you can see in here, see this? Style, width, colon, and you indicate in pixels what's the width. And then height, colon, you indicate in pixels the height. Okay? So notice what you're doing here. You're saying, okay, big image, give me your parent. And we know that the parent is the div called main image. And then you tell the parent, hey, I want you to replace your child. So you're telling main image to replace that image inside it. What are you going to replace it with? You're going to replace the big image with new node. So that's how you get this big image to show as a dot initially. That's all you're doing. How do you know it's a dot? Because it's a 0 by 0. You're not showing anything. Just a dot. Whatever you did last. Whatever you did last precedes. So if you change the style and then you change the width, it's the width that is going to take place. If you change the width and then you later on change the style, it's going to be the style that takes precedence. Whatever you did last. Okay? So in here, you are replacing the image with a really tiny one. Okay? And then, look at this. Now you're going to make use of the window object. Remember, the window object is your browser. The window object has its own scheduler. You can tell browser to do something on a regular interval. And it's called set interval. It's a function of the window. Okay? And what you do here is you tell the window to run every 5 milliseconds to run the run function. And you could call it whatever, Peter, Paul, whatever you want it. In this case, we call it run. Okay? So somewhere in here, it's got to be a run function. So, what did we just do? We grabbed this huge image and we replaced it with a dot. And then we told the browser, hey, I want you to run the run function every 5 milliseconds. That's all we did. As soon as we click on that thumbnail, that's all we did. So now there's this scheduler set on the browser. And it's going, 5 milliseconds, I'm going to run run. So it runs this function. And what does this function do? This function, forget about this for a second, is going to tell the document, hey document, get me an element called image cover. You guys remember who is image cover? This guy. The image inside that div is called image cover. So in this case, it's the one image with 0 by 0 pixels, right? And what are we going to do with that image? We're going to modify the width and the height. In fact, this is what we're going to do. We're going to get this value, and I'm going to tell you in a few seconds what this value means. But we're going to take this value and multiply it by count. And count, remember, is a global variable that starts with 0. Okay? And there's another global variable called speed, which is initialized with 4, the value 4. So when we run, the first time we run run, it's going to increment that count by the speed. So if the count was 0, now it's 4, right? The first 5 milliseconds. And then you take that count and multiply by that number, and that's the amount of pixels of your new width. And then you take that count, and that's the amount of pixels on your new height. So suppose count was 4. So now your 0 by 0 image is going to be a 4 by 3 point something pixels. Very tiny one. And that's it. And then 5 milliseconds later, it's going to take that count and increment it by, again, by the speed. So now it's not 4, it's 8. So now you take this width and you multiply by that number, and then we take that count, 8, and we put it in the height. So now it's a little bit bigger. So every 5 milliseconds is going to make the image bigger, 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 bigger. Now this number is the ratio, average ratio between the width and the height of all these images. 491 is the 75% of 640, approximately. Now, why do you need to multiply the width by that number and not the height in here? If you assign count to both width and height, you're going to be incrementing your width at the same rate as your height. What does that do to an image that is taller and wider? It distorts it. So if you want to keep the image to the same ratio and not distort it, you have to do that. Got it? So this is how we get this to work. Now we're doing it at speed 4. Look what happens when I do it at speed 1. slower but smoother. Look what happens when I do it at speed 10. Now keep in mind, we're not going to do this endlessly, right? What are we going to do it until? Until count is greater than or equal to 375. Okay? Which is the final width of my image. You guys see that? Look at that image. What does it say, the style? Style says the width is 287. The height is 375. I'm not going to keep growing this thing forever. I have to stop somewhere. So when count reaches 375, that means the height will be 375 pixels. When it reaches that, what do? You say, hey window, clear the interval. Delete the scheduler. Don't run anymore. Remember, we initially set the interval, right? So it will start every 5 milliseconds running RUN. Well, now, when we reach this height in pixels, we say, hey window, clear the interval. And that's it. That's how this interval that was set every 5 milliseconds. Now, keep in mind, you can have several things scheduled at the same time in the browser. How do you identify each? Well, you have to identify it as a variable. In this case, the first time that we created it, we put it under the variable interval. That's how we know that when we want to delete that schedule, we just pass interval. We want to clear that interval. No more running. And that's it. Did we do 10? Let's load it. This is 10. Very quick. Not as smooth, but quick. Questions? Alright, we're done with chapter 12. Let's take a break. And then on the second video, I will cover the other 3 chapters.